Hello, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Surge Ahead podcast. I'm Dr. Shanna Katz Kattari, your hostess with the mostess. And as always, I'm delighted to have you join us here as we share our research, our teaching, and praxis experiences when it comes to sexuality, relationships, and gender. Today's guest is soon-to-be Dr. Kelsey Reeder, who uses they, she pronouns and is both a doctoral student in social work at Columbia University and a licensed social work psychotherapist in New York. They're here on our show today to talk about intersectional sexuality and gender work, queer and trans pedagogy, and queer and trans theory. And with that, we're going to dive right in. Okay, Kelsey, I know how brilliant you are, but our listeners are just meeting you. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to the work you do, etc.?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited that this podcast is going, and I can't believe I have the honor to be part of this inaugural episode. Um, so, as Shanna said, I'm Kelsey Reeder. In this world of academia, I'm a sixth year PhD candidate, as they said, but I'm also a therapist to many, an instructor to many more. I'm a teaching consultant, a community member, a partner, and a parent. And I really work to have all of these roles inform the others, despite many of the pressures that academia often pushes to sort of like separate all of these different parts of me into siloed selves. You asked how I come to this work, and the answer is not short. But I've been thinking about this a ton recently because I'm working with community members as I sort of get into my dissertation study, and have been thinking about this question because I've been asked a lot, and also just in sort of like building relationships with folks, it's really helpful for them to kind of know where I'm coming from. And so yeah, so I'll kind of, I'm going to take us back and just explain that the context in which I grew up in had some deeply complicated dynamics, which what else is new? We're social workers. That's going to be true for a lot of us. But without oversharing to what I can only imagine is going to be millions and millions and millions of listeners.
We can only hope.
Um, I moved through some abusive dynamics in the name of care as a child, and experienced a lot of loneliness as a little person, and also a lot of fear. Um, and so when I was in middle school, I sought refuge with a group of evangelical Christians who were very present and valued what I had to say and showed up for me, and knew what was happening in my life. And I spent 10 years building a very rich, loving community in those spaces. But towards the end, I started having queer and trans campers sort of flock to me, in the way that when you're cis and heterosexual and a really good ally, that happens. Um, and so, and I just was like really quite floored by the way that they were treated. They were being prayed over and made to sleep in separate quarters and a variety of other things. And I felt like, wait, these are some of the most loving people I've ever encountered. Like, what's happening here? And then, of course, I realized I was a dyke. And those two things don't mix very well, as many listeners will know. And so I experienced a pretty huge and sort of like devastatingly abrupt cutoff in that time of my life. And it was actually coinciding with me starting social work school. And that was an interesting sort of thing to be writing about in so many of my social work papers.
I can
Um,
imagine.
yeah, and so and then I was placed in a LGBT youth organization, and that had like rainbows painted on the walls and so much gender expansiveness, and I was like, okay, all right, it's been a long road of like trying to find my place, and I've found it, and I'm here, and I found my people. And then I started developing relationships in the space, particularly with folks who had been working there for years, and like direct service providers, most of whom were Black and Brown trans folks. And I started hearing about all sorts of toxic dynamics that were happening between higher ups and case care workers, and um, exploitation and racism and transphobia. And I, I was like, all right, yeah, this sounds both like much more real than sort of like the euphoria that I sort of thought it was when I came in, but also so disappointing. And I think that these three kind of major experiences in my life, my childhood, my time with, within Christian cults and communes, and then my experience with, queer social services and community organizing, radically different experiences, but this like like common thread throughout all of them of like control and cruelty in the name of care. And quite literally sometimes like with rainbows and butterflies. Um, so this is all to say that now like this kind of dynamic has become so central to my work, and I look a lot at the history of social work and the ways that it's been deeply intertwined with settler colonialist projects and white supremacy and Christian supremacy and a variety of other deeply violent forces, and how that has now impacted queer and trans communities. Um, and I partnered that exploration with looking at and being in community with incredible queer and trans people who are taking care of each other outside of so many of these systems, incredibly badass ways. So that was long-winded, but that's what brings me here.
But that's your journey,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, I can see the thread both of like the cruelty, but also almost of the oh, I mean, disappointment feels too light, maybe betrayal of these spaces that are
Mhm.
supposed to be so caring, right? And when you're
Mhm.
where you feel like you found a home, like whether your childhood home, finding the home in these evangelical spaces, finding a home in the queerness amongst all the rainbows, and then having that like, the what is it, the rug dragged out from underneath you
Mhm.
of like, oh yeah, like this is common across all of this, and in every loving space there's going to be that kind of challenge because of all those things that undergird our society of capitalism, colonialism, Christianity, all those pieces rearing
Totally.
their
And I
ugly
think a
head.
lot about this definition of shame as joy interrupted. And it has been present in all of these different places, and just like how the way that joy interrupted can produce a shame that then like lives in us very deeply.
Mm. I mean, we're like 10 minutes in and I'm already like, I didn't know about that. I'm learning so much already. So,
Mm.
um, I want to ask you about either research or teaching or praxis. You're kind of a triple threat. You can tell I have a bit of a theater background, but oftentimes scholars show up really strong in one area, but not necessarily as excited or as engaged in the others. But in hearing you talk, like it's clear that you care very much about this in all different ways, like, and it's all built out of your community work and your place in and with community. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit about something that you're up to and how you're connecting these kind of three areas together.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess since I was just kind of talking about this through line in my research, I'll start there. So my dissertation research is a CPAR. study. It's a critical participatory action research study, which basically is a methodology that insists on both co-researching with community members and also creating meaningful action as opposed to sort of like writing things that then end up getting stuck behind paywalls. Um,
We're looking at
so
you, Academy.
so my research is working with 30 queer and trans care providers who are employed by LGBT specific social service agencies in New York City. And we're looking at a couple of things. So we're looking at how queer and trans folks think about and conceptualize care outside of their jobs, how they feel their jobs allow them to contribute to queer and trans liberation, the ways that they may feel that their jobs actually position them to be disruptive of queer and trans liberation, and then finally, sort of like how they dream of queer and trans collective care futures. So that's been a really, really exciting project that's underway right now, and yeah, has been great. And in my therapy practice, I work with predominantly queer and trans folks. No one's surprised by that. But really, like anything and everything comes up in our therapy work. I think the the main areas that sort of I specialize in and often come into therapy with me is like um, family challenges or family conflict, relationship challenges, religious trauma, um, opening relationships, sex, dynamics at work, like all of the things that many of us move through constantly. Um, and I'm formally trained in relational psychodynamic work, but my hope is to start moving into like I need to graduate from the program first, but I would really love to be trained in somatic based work. Um, because a lot of the like sort of teachers, I'll say, the people that I've been reading as I do my research are more like body-based workers. Um, so yeah, so that's research and practice. And then teaching is like I think my greatest joy. I mean, I love being a therapist and I love doing research. But I feel like those two things come together and like fully inform what I bring to a classroom. And because I so love to be in community, I feel like a classroom is constantly like every time you step in the door, you're back in community with people and you're learning together. And um, I love it. So right now I'm teaching an LGBT social work practice class, which, believe it or not, has been the hardest class I've taught to date, but it's been a good challenge for me and we're doing cool things. So I can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, I love the way you position the classroom as a community. And I teach pedagogy, and that's absolutely one of the first things I teach. And I would agree with you. I think teaching queer and trans classes, I mean, generally brings a lot of joy and it comes with a lot of challenges that I can also imagine. I'm white and so it's not my experience, but for racialized professors who are teaching classes on, Black or African American social work or Latinx social work, etc. Because there's, at least for me, that big intersection of like these are our own experiences, especially that we're living right now in 2026 when this is being recorded. And each
Hmm.
week I'm coming in and being like, okay, well, here's an update on where trans kids can't get their names and pronouns used anymore. Here's an update on where trans youth can't get health care. Here's an update on the state is going to make it a felony for a trans person to use a bathroom of a different gender than what's on their,
Yeah.
documentation. And for me, one of the things I do in class to really make space for students is we take time at the beginning of the class to go through what's going on in the world a little bit, and then to also talk about it as it relates to our content, right? So when I'm teaching sexuality and social work, we talk about like what's going on in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran, like how can we talk about reproductive justice if people can't get food, can't be, safely go to school, can't safely live, right? We make those connections. In my queer classes, we talk about, how these policies are impacting us, but also how it's fomenting new resistance movements and new pushback and whatnot. So I would love to hear a little bit more about your teaching because I've been having, those similar challenges and joys of teaching that class during the fall of empire.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's a big question. I mean, yeah, I think part of I mean, okay, where should I start? So the classes that I have taught up until now have been generalized classes that are required for all social work students. And then one advanced clinical practice class, which is required for clinical students. So I think that there is a way that so much of that curriculum is standardized. And so I, as the instructor, could kind of move in and out of support. If I'm being fully honest with myself and with you all listeners, like I could move in and out of agreeing with and then critiquing the curriculum. And I try to do so in really thoughtful ways that don't sort of like split in the classroom between, I just don't find that to be helpful for students to like totally be critiquing what we're learning. But this class was like, here, you have full control over the syllabus. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, I have to really own what happens in this room. And I will not do it justice. I just won't. Like there will, and therefore harm will be caused because there will be experiences that like there will be students in this room whose experiences deeply deserve to be like seen in what we read and what we talk about, and I will miss things. And so it has been so hard also because certain people come to this class because they're like, I don't know anything about queer and trans people. Like I don't have a single queer or trans person in my life. Um, what can you explain how to ask someone what their pronouns are? All the way to like, I have, all of my community is queer and trans. I transitioned years ago. I've been doing work in the community for 10, 15, 20 years, and I want to get into like really deep clinical nuance in this class. And you're sort of like, okay, how do we cater to that range? Um, so that is to say, that we the syllabus that we were given and I shared with my students in the first week was like it was just quite deficit based and really, really centered like the pain and oppression of queer and trans folks. And I was like, we do that so much in social work education, and I just felt like, y'all, we can't afford to do this, and we certainly can't afford to do this right now. Like, this is just not what our systems are needing. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I can talk to you about like what our assignments became and kind of how we as a collective took the class, or if there's certain things that could be you think could be interesting for listeners. But yeah, it's been a challenge for me.
For sure. I have that same issue. And in our first session, I actually just name it. And I'm
Mhm.
like, we want people here that know nothing about queer and trans folks because we want them to figure it out here in school and not with clients, right?
Yeah.
Or with communities that they're serving.
Yes.
And we have all these students who are like, this is the first space where I haven't gotten misgendered,
Yes.
or where I'm talking about queer and trans people at all, or that I'm talking about queer and trans people from a joy perspective, or at the very least, like a strengths-based perspective. And I say to that, I'm like, we've got 101ers in here and we've got 301ers. And so I'm going to teach the class at like a 201 level. And I'm hoping that those of you that are new to this, are willing to do a little extra work to read the glossaries, to do some of this
Mm,
extra education on your own. And I'm hoping some of you for whom this is your lived experience or this is where your practice has been before you came to our program are willing to kind of, grow into this space and help folks along their
yeah.
journey, right?
Wow.
Because it's impossible. And And even with that, I'm in the middle of revamping our online social work practice with LGBTQIA2S plus individuals and communities course. And, every time I'm doing a revamp, at the end of my previous class, I asked those students, I'm like, so what do we keep? What do we jettison? What am I missing? Right. And they're like, oh, we should do a whole week on asexuality. And I'm like, absolutely. What do we cut out? Right. And they're like, oh, and they're like, we should do a whole week on, XYZ. And yeah, it
So
is
we need a class on asexuality.
we need a class on asexuality. We need classes on transness,
Yes.
right? Because people want information on like really nuanced things like how to write letters and how
Hmm.
to, especially I teach in our online program. I have students in Texas right now that are like, how do I support trans kids when it's illegal basically to do so,
Yeah.
right? And like getting scrappy around that. We need um, you know, classes on different types of relationship styles because my
Oh,
queer
yeah.
class and my sex class are where I bring in non-monogamy, relationship anarchy, queer chosen family, all of these things, and students are not getting that anywhere else, including
No, and we've got like one session. You're like, okay, this is the session
this is it,
on
right?
polyamory and consensual non-monogamy. So here we go.
Well, and
Yeah.
mine is kink and consensual non-monogamy
Yeah.
because I'm like, these are things that are going to show up in queer spaces, and you
Yes.
need to at least know the language, even if you don't want to be a sex and relationship therapist. Right? It is such a challenge. And I teach one day we do queer sex ed, the sex ed you never got in schools. And so, I'm making dams out of plastic wrap and gloves and showing them, how you can do all these things. And it's so important. And yeah, it's wild that it is this one class, at least for us, that's an elective that
Hmm.
is, it's I would say a safer space for queer and trans students to land, but then this tension because I have so much fear around microaggressions that happen in that space because I don't want,
Hmm.
right? And so I think that's that piece in the front for me at least about the importance of building it as a community and modeling things like call-ins and hearing when you fucked up and also recognizing that if you want to be in this space, this is not a safe space TM. This is all
Hmm.
of us
Hmm.
doing the best we can with what we have,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm interested, what other things do you do in the classroom to kind of navigate some of these tensions that you've mentioned?
Yeah, so okay, so I did something that is both like advisable and probably not advisable, but in the first week we went through and when as everyone was sort of introducing themselves and talking about the work that they do in practicum, the work that they want to do, I asked a couple of questions that were basically along the lines of like, what are you wanting to see in the syllabus? What do you want to leave the class with? And yeah, like what would you, yeah, basically like what would you be bummed if you left the class and you didn't get this? And then so they shared that aloud as they introduced themselves. And then I sent out an anonymous survey after the class that had a question like, what's one thing about queer and trans experience that you wish you understood better? So that was cool because there was something created by students hearing what other people wanted and kind of building off of that. But then I wanted to create a space that folks could, particularly sort of like the 101 folks, could be like, I don't know anything about this, but I don't want to say that out loud. And so I took all the notes that I took of what people had said in the class and then the entries from the survey and basically like did put it all together, reorganized it into weeks, and then tried to kind of create a course that tracked what each, you know, what everyone said that they wanted, which is impossible. It's an entirely impossible task. Um, but I think that part of, at least the part of the way that I think in terms of like designing curriculum and pedagogy is, if you're seeing that you're not going to be able to go deep in a certain area in the classroom, how can you incorporate that into the assignments? And so we basically had 4 assignments throughout the semester, and they were the idea was that they were all going to go into a collective resource at the end. So we're basically at this point in the semester, we're like building a, big PDF, could be a booklet if printed. And it combines everyone's assignments from the whole semester. Um, and, folks have been able to say whether they want to be, credited for their work or if they want to be anonymous, because this could be a resource that's shared out. But basically, there was one assignment on, let me take a second because I want to make sure I get these right. Okay, so the first was a review of any kind of queer or trans media, and what social work could learn from that media. Like who that media was created for, did it shift any paradigms, and like what does our field need to learn from it? Um, the second was a paper charting a queer or trans history of their choosing, and commentary on sort of like how can social work or how social workers ought to practice in ways that are accountable to that lineage. The third was they could go do whatever the sort of like local queer or trans experience they wanted to, and then do a write-up on the accessibility of the space, who was their space for, who wasn't, like, who wasn't their space for, who wasn't there, and what social work can learn about how to cultivate queer space, and what makes something uniquely queer, and sort of starting to play with that. And then the fourth, which my students just submitted, which was so brilliant, was a write-up of any kind of queer or trans subculture, of their choice. And then they wrote about sort of like policy implications for that subculture, and produced a reflective exercise, like reflective questions for any social workers or students reading this resource to basically ask themselves to sort of push their practice forward. Um, so I really thought about the ways that systems are and institutions are entirely failing us right now as a community. And I was like, I really want us to spend a lot of time looking at what queer and trans folks have done for each other throughout history when the institution has failed us, because right now we're in a moment where it's failing us, and this can't be, like, we can't be focusing on how the institution's failing us, because we've been surviving forever without the help of the institution. So anyway, it is bringing me such deep joy to pull all of these things together into this booklet and read through it. It's so long. It's gonna be like 80 pages. So we certainly can't print a copy for everyone in the class, but it is so beautiful, and I hope will be sort of like a contribution to Queer Archive, because yeah, it's been really, really lovely to put together.
Mm, that's amazing. I love the creativity behind that. And yeah, if you'd like us to host a copy on the SRG website, of course, we'd be happy to do so because I
Amazing.
very selfishly want to read it. That sounds wonderful.
Absolutely.
Now, one thing you named was, the joy that this has brought for you. And we've talked a little bit about the importance of joy, and we're hoping to have Brendan Holloway on this show this season.
Yes.
And he does a lot of writing about trans joy, and their work is just incredible. I'm wondering, in the midst of everything that's going on, what is one way that you're centering joy right now in your personal and or professional life?
Yeah. This this feels like a trap of a question in this moment of April 24th, final season, like just scraping by. Um, but I mean, I think that, like, whether it's like selfish or just, multi-directional healing practice, like this collective resource that's coming together has been like my main source of joy in the past couple of weeks, is reading all of these students' pieces and thinking about each of them getting to read each other's, and like I'm putting tags in the booklet around, like, this person went to a lesbian bar in the city. If you want to read about the history of lesbian bars, this person wrote about the history of lesbian bars. So, um, yeah, that has been bringing me a ton of joy. And, I shared earlier that I'm a parent and of an almost 2-year-old. And the transition from being a childless queer to a parenting queer has been profound for me and my partner as we navigate this and in very shifting communities. Like it just is, we were not part of a community that had a lot of children in it. And so it's been paving new roads. And I find so much joy now in the messiness of queer parenting alongside other trans and queer parents. And just like when we get to be in community with each other and we're not like also because there's something about parenting that like all of a sudden you're gathered with so many cishet people all of a sudden and you're like, whoa, this is not my group. But yeah, it's really it's a joy to like swim in, our own sexual and relational and gender experiences as we raise children who will inevitably move through that same exploration and we're all so tired and under-resourced and so like so resourced by each other. So that's another really big source of joy for me.
Mm, I can like feel that as you're talking. So we are reaching the end of our time together. I feel like I could talk to you about this stuff for days. So we'll have to get you back on a little bit later to talk more about theory. And I want to hear, of course, what you come up with your research. But for now, I'd love one short takeaway of something that you want everyone who's listening to know or do or hear or feel or be after today.
Okay. So I had to really think about this. And I, okay. The one thing I will say is that academia is an incredibly, incredibly hard place to be in a body. Um, of any kind, but particularly a disabled body, particularly a marginalized body. Like it's rough. And so if you are navigating academia as a student or you're considering going back to school or starting school anew or getting a PhD or anything, and you're just like, I am not cut out for it. I am, and like you're feeling feelings of inadequacy, just know that this system is built to do that. Like, so that if you're feeling that way, that like that's normal and like a lot of people feel that way and we are here and we are doing work and this has turned into like a machine of production and yet there are people here who like want to hear about your personal experiences, your struggles and AI hasn't had your experiences. And so AI can't write about them. And so we like need deeply, deeply need you. And we are like fully here and ready with arms wide to accept and support your process.
Yes, I'm like cheering on the inside. And as a note with that, SRG work does not use AI. We do a slow science approach. We want everybody's experiences and stories and data and however we name it to be held and valued and seen for what it is. So really appreciate that. Lastly, where can people find more about you and your work? Do you have any websites or social media conferences that they can see you at?
Yeah, my website is kelseyreeder.com. So
Great.
just my first and last name. I'm not on social media.
Good
I
for you.
I really miss what Twitter once was, but that's,
Same.
no longer
Same.
with us. Yeah, I'm going to be presenting on some of the things that I talked about, or I'm hoping to present on some of the things I talked about, both at CSWE and at SWIR. At
That's
CSWE,
the Council on Social Work Education's annual program meeting, and SWIR is the Society for Social Work Research.
thank you. Sorry, so deeply in it at this point. But yes, I'm hoping to present on actually how to create class-wide collective assignments with students. similar to the one that I talked about at CSWE. And then at SWIR, I just submitted with a group of rad researchers on sort of like funding and financial politics in critical participatory action research. So I would love to have you there and to meet and learn from you if you are listening and interested in connecting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, your insights, and your just generosity of spirit. And as I mentioned, it's always good to be in community and in solidarity with you, Kelsey. Thank you, gentle listeners, for engaging with the Surge Ahead podcast as we work to bring our research, practice, and pedagogy to life during these trying times. Visit srgcollective.com for this and other episodes, as well as to learn more about the work we're currently doing. You can also find us on LinkedIn and BlueSky. Together, we can build the world that we all deserve. Remember, we take care of us. I'm Dr. Shanna Katz Kattari, signing off.